One of the most important things in game is how they make us feel. Whether it's happy, sad, horny or angry, it doesn't matter, as long as they are made well. However, some games are not that lucky, and they have more downside than upside, but even within those there are some that are extremely outrageous and frustrating. I am Matt from the Gaming Mattress, and here are 10 of the worst and most outrageously disappointing video games ever. There's no specific order to the list. Number 10. Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. Sonic Chronicles is a boring game to say the least. It is a turn-based game, so if you don't know me already, turn-based games are not my thing. Although I believe that any game will have some people that would like it, but when you compare it to the games that came before it, Sonic Chronicles was really boring. It was developed by BioWare, and although they had great success with other games such as Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, Dragon Age and Mass Effect for example, they dropped the ball on this one and made it a BioWare Biohazard. The music sometimes feels very unfitting. The most noticeable part where you can hear it is in the combat. It just doesn't fit with the Sonic franchise. I don't know how else to explain it. It feels like a disco or a beach party is going on. And with this, the thing that I'm missing the most is the iconic and well-known speed of Sonic. Well, not exactly. You have speed skill which allow the game to determine who will attack first. The higher the speed skill, the first in order to attack. It's clearly a very different game from the other Sonic games, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the execution of it that fell short. The game in general feels a bit off topic. Number 9. Superman 64. Many reviewers regarding this game as one of the worst and most frustrating games that they have ever played. Some people even believe that it is an incomplete game, which to that I don't really know. Controlling the character is not very easy and the camera movement does not work very well, which leads you to get lost or get stuck in various obstacles. The tutorial is almost non-existing. There is a general message that tells you to press certain button, but it doesn't explain which button exactly that is. A specific example is in the level where you need to get rid of some tornado storms, and the game will tell you to press the blow button, but it doesn't tell you which of the buttons on the controller is the correct one. There are also many ring stages where you need to fly through those rings. Due to the fact that the controls are not very comfortable, it makes it harder and more annoying. Not to mention that each level have a time limit and sometimes you don't even have a clock to show you how much time do you have. The game is also buggy and make it harder for you to finish the levels. For example, in a level where you need to chase a car, you will come across a point in the road where you'll get stuck for a few seconds. It might be a collider thing as part of the unfinished game, but it feels like a bug to me. Most of the reviews that you'll find about this game are bad, and it's not very surprising. Number 8. Link's The Faces of Evil and Zelda The Wand of Gamelon. Although different in story, these games had a lot of similarities in gameplay and environment. They were both developed by Animation Magic and were released on the same day. In Link The Faces of Evil you play as Link, and in Zelda The Wand of Gamelon you play as Zelda. The cutscenes animations are kinda creepy looking, the characters are moving weirdly in general, it just seems wrong in a way. It's like we're watching Betty Boop but extremely pixelated. The controls weren't set up efficiently, which I believe could have been more flexible and easygoing based on the technology in the time period that the game was released. One example for it is jumping is something that you needed to do regularly, and it requires the players to press the up button, and it's not so easy when you need to aim accurately toward the platform that you are trying to jump to and move the character with the same finger on the same button. And in general, you need to be accurate in your position in the world because the action button will work differently. You use the same button to throw bombs, create magic, and enter doors. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people throw bombs instead of entering the door, and they needed to change their location bit by bit up until they managed to do so. It is such a great franchise but had such a fall with this game. Thankfully, the games pulled themselves up with later releases. Number 7. Right to Hell: Retribution. The story feels like a plot from a failed action movie, and it's not pretty. Some of the characters are acting weird, even for old Western movies. The voice acting as well fit to the narrative of a bad action film. It has some awkward and weird sexual stuff in it as well, but let's stay out of it this time. The long motorcycle riding mission where you need to punch your rivals off their motorbikes, but after understanding how long and repetitive they truly are, well, let's just say it's not so cool anymore. With sluggish gun aiming and slow gunfight, this is a treat that must stay in the bag. And adding the slow aiming guns and already repetitive long bike riding, it makes it different, yes, but it also makes everything even slower. You wouldn't imagine that this feature will make the game look much better, but alas, it is not the case. I would rather play GTA 4 all over again. Number 6. Flatout 3. The Flatout franchise started with greatness. The developers built these racing games with different approach. Instead of just enjoying the races and the wins, they added the crashing mechanics where the driver is flying out of the car, and new types of levels to cope with this mechanic. There was nothing that was more fun than to crash your car and see the driver fly through the front windshield. However, Flatout 3 ruined that fun. The car feels very heavy and the handling is very rough, and the physics of all things around you are just abnormal. It's very hard to take a turn, but it's very easy to fly other cars around. There are also many bugs where the driver in your car disappeared or when you can pass through obstacles like a ghost. You can also fall outside of the game's world. In the demolition level where you need to destroy other cars, the enemy AI is only fixated on you and not randomly on each other as well, which lead to a hard time in playing these levels. The sounds are okay, but when you get to the targeting levels, you know, those levels where you need to fly the driver out of the windshield to hit a target, the voices of the characters are just embarrassing and weird. In some race levels, the winner is decided by final score and not by who's getting to the finish line first. It's just crazy how many bad things can go with one game. Before we continue with the list, I want to thank you all for watching it up until now. If you do want to see more of this kind of video, please let me know in the comment below, press a like, subscribe, and let's continue with the list. Number 5. Driver 3. After the success of the two first games in the franchise, Driver 3, or just like how GameRanks like to call it, Drive 3R, brought the franchise down to its knees. Instead of what every fan was waiting for, they got this underwhelming experience of an unfinished game and underperformed experience. It's pretty easy to say that fans didn't like it. The publisher Atari SA were in a rush to release the game, and it shows with how the game turned out. The driving is just okay and not as much as you expected from a game that called itself Driver. The handling are a bit too loose, especially in corners, which is fine, but again, not something that you'll expect from a game that called Driver. Controlling the characters itself outside of the car also had its issues. The movement is kinda slow, the crouching, rolling and running have their issues as well. The enemies are just dumb, there is no question about it. Some of them will just run toward you as you stand there and shoot them, and only when they'll get close enough to you, they will try to shoot you, which will be way too late. The Driver games were regarded as a GTA competitor at that time, but overall the reason that it is one of the worst games is because it didn't stand for the expectations by a large margin. Needless to say, Driver 3 hurt that reputation, and the franchise hadn't really stood up ever since. Number 4. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. One of the most repeated opinions about this game is that it is a first-person shooter with special effects. And I completely agree. It lacks the wonder of magic usages and makes you feel like you are holding various different guns. There is a shotgun, the machine gun, the pistol, and more. The controls are not very comfortable, you will try to take cover and it will be janky sometimes. Aiming from one enemy to the other is also not as fast as it needs to be, and some of the spells are much less effective from far away, which will lead you to get closer, and it's highly possible that you'll lose a segment. Some levels are designed for you to be stealthy. Is it a word? I don't know, but use it anyway. Because the controls are not very comfortable, being stealthy is a bit of a challenge, which is not bad on its own, but it's definitely not fun and quite annoying. In every level there are the same things that are in the other levels, which are moving a bit forward, fighting enemies, moving a bit forward again, fighting more enemies, and so on. There aren't many moments where you do more than that. And my least favorite part, the filler levels. A bunch of missions that had nothing to do with the story itself. It feels like they put those levels just to get a few more minutes or hours to the game. Number 3. Way of the Warrior. Way of the Warrior is a fighting game that feels like it was created for crash grab only. The controls and overall mechanics are pretty weird. The characters can jump very high for some reason, and some of the attacks in general are pretty weird as well. I mean, look at that. The characters sometimes are pretty weird looking as well. I have learned that the production of this game was mostly cheap and that most of the characters are based on friends and families of the developers. The game was somewhat of a Mortal Kombat knockoff, which explained some of the moves in the game. Moves such as fatality lookalikes, exploding heads, punching the hole through the stomachs, and a few more. What it's definitely like is a charm. Unlike Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, which were the biggest fighting games at that time, and arguably up until today, the characters, the fighting, the music, and the overall vibe of the games fell short. As I stated, the characters are kinda boring and not much appealing. The fighting moves are weird and it doesn't feel like the characters can actually fight. And the music is okay, but after a while, you will want to turn this off. The one positive thing that I can say about this game is that it shows what you shouldn't do when you build a fighting game. Number 2. Big rigs. Saying that there is no bug to this game will be correct. And I only say that because the game doesn't have any rules whatsoever. It was marketed as a racing game, but oh boy, it was far off any racing game in existence. Aside from the floor, there is no collision in any of the things that you'll see. You can pass through everything that you can see. The building, the other cars, your opponents, and even with the bridges that you're supposed to ride over. You will pass through them and fall down. Now don't you worry, if you fall you will still be able to drive the truck and come back up on the other side. You can drive on the mountains almost in 90 degrees and you'll be able to stop the truck and drive in reverse freely. The only sound that this game has is the sound of the truck. I mean, listen to this. In some of the versions of the game, your opponent doesn't even move from the starting line. In those cases, you can drive wherever you want, up the mountains, in circles, and even out of the map itself. Don't worry, there is no limit as to where you can go, maybe below the surface, but it might be possible as well. Even if you do try to cross the finish line, you don't have to, because of the moment that you are close enough to the finish line, you will be declared the winner. In the version where your opponent does move, you will still be the winner even if you cross the finish line after your opponent, and that's because that's just how it is. Well, I can go on and on about all the issues that this game has, but I believe that you get the point. Number 1. E.T. E.T. is regarded for many as the worst game that was ever created, and some may believe that this game is the reason for Atari's bankruptcy. The game doesn't have a tutorial that explains what to do and how to do things, which requires you as a player to read the instructions and learn, which is not something that many would like to do. I actually can't think of a game that was released in the 90s that had a similar requirement. There are holes in the ground that you can fall into. Every time that you fall into one of these holes, you will have to levitate your way out of it. And that is also not a very simple thing to do in terms of button pressing. There are many of these holes and there is a 100% guarantee that you will fall into them again and again. Although you can fall down these holes, your enemies can't. And when you need to move from one side of the map to the other, and all while avoiding getting captured by the officers or the doctor, you will need to avoid those holes, but your enemies won't have to. How refreshing and delightful. There are some items that you will have to get from time to time, and you can find them inside those holes. But every time that you start the game, they will be randomly in a different place. So the overall experience of the game is frustrating, and it's not really surprising as to why it was a flop. And that was the list. If you have more games that you think about that I didn't mention in this list, please let me know if you want me to make a second video with those games. Let me know which games they are and I will check them out. Well, thank you so much for watching it up until now. Leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment if you want to, and don't forget, enjoy your games.